Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's almost as if this has been sort of scripted by some diabolical satirist, this programme today, because I loved meeting those two, and the book is amazing, Factfulness. I've dipped into it. I didn't read the whole thing because I knew that when I met them they'd try to test me on some of the stuff that the book unveils, but it does give you reasons to be cheerful, certainly if you can look at the world through a perspective of the last 5 or 6 decades. Most of the progress has been in the right direction, and while it sometimes feels as if we're now going in the opposite direction, it's a really, really, really good thing if you like knowledge. Of course, I recognise that a significant proportion of populations don't like knowledge. They like comforting lies. But these are comforting truths. That's the third leg of the stool. The reason why I say it's almost as if it's been scripted by a satirist is because Donald Trump has just tweeted, and this is true. I wish it was April the 1st. And I wish he was still a television presenter, but he's not. He is the President of the United States of America, and he has just tweeted, Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming, nice and new and smart, ! You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal. That's capitalised, the first letters of that phrase, gas-killing animal, who kills his people and enjoys it. And then there's another exclamation mark. And there's one caveat here that I don't know if anyone could describe it as comforting. But the one caveat here is Donald Trump's abject unreliability. The fact that he has, I think, didn't he change his mind or say opposing things about abortion on 4 or 5 different occasions in the course of a single day, depending on who he was talking to? So the only thing that prevents me from describing this as possibly the most chilling thing I've shared with you in all the years that we've been talking to each other in the mornings, the only thing that puts the brakes on that slightly apocalyptic description is the knowledge that he is utterly unreliable, and he could change his mind in the space of a tea break. In the amount of time it takes most of us to eat a biscuit, he can go, as we've observed many times on this programme, from arguing that black is black to insisting that black is in fact white. But this is the leader of what we used to call the free world. Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming, nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. Now, if you were to study, if you like, the playbook of authoritarian dictatorships, and dictatorship is still not the correct description of Donald Trump, but authoritarian clearly is. Or if, on a rather more shallow level, you've listened to this programme a lot over the last couple of years, you'll know that there's a sense of inevitability to military escalation when you have such a corrupt regime, because at some point you're going to have a dead cat to throw on the table that involves dead humans. You're being investigated for all manner of offences against the Constitution, against women, against basic morality. At some point, you're going to have to throw red meat to your supporters, and history suggests that red meat is almost always war or military action. But never has it been served up in quite such a simple, I mean that in the offensive sense of the word simple, simple-minded. Never has it been served up in such a cynical and simple-minded way. I can't quite believe what I'm seeing. Brian Klaas is on the line. He is, as you know, the fellow in global politics at the LSE and a columnist for the Washington Post. He's also the author of a book that, in many ways, well, have you got anything wrong yet, Brian, in what you've suggested the evolution of this presidency might be?
It's been scarily accurate, unfortunately.
Yeah, so it's not very satisfying, is it, to be proved right in such grisly circumstances? Just from the hip, if you would, your immediate reaction to both the tone and the content of this latest tweet from Trump.
It's unhinged, it's reckless, it's dangerous. It's escalating a conflict directly with Russia and effectively, goading them into responding with more escalation.
Which Putin likes that game, doesn't he?
He does. It makes him look stronger among his domestic constituency, which is something he wants very much, to play the sort of strong man on the global stage. And it elevates Putin. But on top of that, I mean, this is already a really dangerous event. The airstrikes are almost certainly going to happen today or tonight. And at this point, there's always the risk of miscalculation. There's the risk of the U.S. shooting down a Russian airplane that's in the same airspace. So in this moment, that Donald Trump is unhinged and clearly, who is goading a nuclear power with Twitter again.
I know in your book, The Despot's Apprentice, you unpick the sort of path towards dictatorship or the path towards despotism. Is it as simple as some would contend today? This has nothing to do with genuine concern about chemical attacks. This is all about Donald Trump's personal political psychodrama.
Well, it's always difficult to infer intent with Trump. But I would say that, the fact of the matter is that anytime you see the breakdown of democracy, or what I call creeping authoritarianism, the things that provide fuel to that fire are a person who is cornered by rule of law and a escalation of military intervention, which widens the possibility of things that people will accept in a democracy. And both of those things are coming to a head this week, because Trump is facing serious criminal investigations swirling around his presidency. He is threatening to fire the special counsel, which is basically the embodiment of rule of law in America.
Yes.
And he's about to attack Syria. And so this, as a scholar of democracy and authoritarianism, is the most worried I've been about democracy in the United States, certainly in my lifetime, and certainly in modern history as well.
And when you throw Vladimir Putin into the mix, you have, and I suspect that academics and some journalists are always a little bit skeptical that great book about your country, It Couldn't Happen Here, that there's always a reluctance to go all in on what the evidence might suggest, because Putin has said he will shoot missiles out of the sky. Donald Trump has now invited him to do so. America is, you believe, likely in the next 24 hours to launch bombing raids, and that posits two nuclear powers no longer fighting a proxy war, but actually fighting each other.
Yeah, and that's why, in the book, when I say, I'm very measured about these things, because it's a very strong claim to make that the U.S. is flirting with authoritarianism. But when I talk about it, I say, look, the way that this could happen is through a national security crisis or war that changes the political acceptance of previously unacceptable behavior. And frankly, the last 20 months in the U.S. have been a masterclass on how to make unacceptable behavior normal.
Yes.
Because they're just every day there's something crazy happening. And now that this is happening at the same time as a military escalation with a direct provocation to one of the most significant military powers in the world, there is a real risk of a national security crisis beyond anything we've seen in the Trump White House, certainly, and possibly in the last several decades.
Now, we had a conversation on this program in the first hour today from 10 o'clock about what the response should be, what the British public would like the British Prime Minister to do. And a phrase emerged during the course of the conversation that it might involve the wrong people doing the right thing. And that's built upon the perception that actually punishing regimes that employ chemical weapons against civilians is something that is in the interests of both international law and world peace. So despite the fact that it's Donald Trump doing it, is there any comfort to be derived from the fact that he is, under most analyses, doing the right thing?
Yes, so I think that there is some merit, not because it will deter Assad, because I think that unless Trump goes all in with a military strike and really risks catastrophe with Russia, it won't change Assad's calculations that much. It does send a signal to other regimes who are thinking about using chemical weapons that the U.S. will respond, which I think is an important aspect. But I think your point is absolutely right, because the problem is a lot of people will suspect that Trump is doing this to deflect media coverage, which
Yes.
may be true. And that means that the message of it is diluted, because you always have to question with Trump, is it because he wants better ratings? Is it because he wants to deflect coverage? Is it because he has business interests that may be affected by a certain foreign policy decision? And so all of these things that swirl around Trump's thinking really undercut even positive foreign policy moves and make them either meaningless or counterproductive. And that's why you can have people who are genuinely in favor of military strikes saying, look, this might be a good approach, but when you do this on Twitter and when you announce it to the world on Twitter and goad Putin on Twitter, it's extremely dangerous. And that's the message that I think we all need to rally around. Is
yes.
that military choices are not supposed to be announced on Twitter, and they're not supposed to be in-your-face challenges of a machismo against a nuclear power.
I mean, it is surreal, but I suppose in many ways it's slightly reassuring to know that we're still capable of being shocked by the level of surrealism that he's brought into the mainstream. Final question, Brian Klaas. What now is the best-case scenario for what happens next?
Well, I guess the best-case scenario is that there is not a further escalation, that the tweet is not reflective of U.S. policy, which sometimes is the case, and that the military airstrikes are at least limited enough that they do not end up creating a hot war with Russia.
That would constitute the best case scenario. I apologise. I've got one more question. Do the mechanics of the American administration offer any checks and balances on this, or if Donald Trump decides to launch an attack on Syrian territory, he can? Because I thought Obama was prevented from doing so by Congress.
So technically speaking, Congress is supposed to authorize war, but in practice, since September 11th, the U.S. president has had virtually unchecked power to order airstrikes anywhere in the world. And it's why this is such a significant thing, because I think a lot of people don't understand that if Trump wants to launch a nuclear weapon, there is literally no check. That the whole system is designed not to have checks on airstrikes because of the risk of sort of immediate retaliation from someone like Russia. So the system is designed without checks for these foreign policy military interventions, at least of the airstrike variety. Full declarations of war require congressional approval. But, if this escalates quickly, we are basically counting on Donald Trump not to be unhinged, which is a very bad bet to make.
Yeah, I don't know quite what to say. I want to say thank you, but at the same time, I kind of want to press rewind and pretend that none of this is happening. Brian Klaas, expert analysis as always, and Brian's book, The Despot's Apprentice, Donald Trump's Attack on Democracy, is, well, required reading, again, as with the book we were talking about just a moment ago when things in the studio felt a lot more cheerful. It is required reading if you're interested in facts and reality, but of course, if the world or a majority of voters were interested in facts and reality, then Donald Trump wouldn't be president. 12/18 is the time. I think this might be, of all the years we've spent together, this is the time when I don't know what to say. Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming. Nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. Tweets a man who could launch a nuclear attack pretty much without obstacle.
All right. So, Mr. Trump, what's he said now is the question, I suppose.
Just when you
this
think
is in the Telegraph.
Yeah, and just when you think a potential Trump presidency couldn't get any crazier or, in fact, scarier, he manages to do it. The Telegraph has got this story about him asking, I think during a foreign affairs briefing, 3 times about nuclear weapons. If we've got nuclear weapons, why can't we use them?
What concerns you most about Donald Trump?
How erratic he is, Joe. I can argue about this position or that position. I do that with the current president. But he's inconsistent. And when you're the head of a global superpower, inconsistency, unpredictability, those are dangerous things. They frighten your friends and they tempt your enemies. And so I would be very, very concerned.
And Chip Reid now joins us from Washington. Chip, we just heard Madam Secretary Clinton referring to Senator Cruz's proposal to actively police Muslim American neighborhoods. And now Donald Trump appears to be looking to aggressively one-up him with anti-Muslim rhetoric. I want to let the watchers listen to what Trump had to say about using nuclear weapons to fight ISIS.
I'm never going to rule anything out, right. And I wouldn't want to say, even if I felt it wasn't going, I wouldn't want to tell you that, right. Because at a minimum, I want them to think maybe we would use it, okay? Right. It's the worst thing when we do these interviews with everybody, not me, and you ask a question like that, and everybody comes clean and they're so honest. You know, we need unpredictability.
Good red meat, perhaps, for the Republican base in the primary, Chip, but this could come back then to haunt Donald Trump in the general election.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure there are Democrats all over Washington and wherever else right now imagining ads portraying Donald Trump as reckless and asking, is this the guy you want to have his finger on the nuclear button?
Your most controversial suggestion was don't take nuclear weapons. I mean, you may have been hooked into this by a press question.
Don't take what?
Nuclear weapons off the table. I have been trying to think how we could conceivably use a nuclear weapon in the Middle East or in Europe in fighting ISIS. Where can you and why put it on the table or leave it on the table if you can't imagine where to use it?
I didn't say don't take it. I said I would be very, very slow and hesitant.
Well, why wouldn't you just say I don't want to talk about it? I don't want to talk about nuclear weapons. Presidents don't talk about use of nuclear weapons.
The question was asked. We're talking about NATO, which, by the way, I say is obsolete.
But you got hooked into something you shouldn't have talked about.
I think, well, someday maybe.
Maybe?
Of course. If somebody
where would we drop a nuclear weapon in the Middle East?
Let me explain. Somebody hits us with a nuke.
ISIS.
You wouldn't fight back with a nuke?
No, to drop a nuclear weapon into a community of people
but you can't say. First of all, you don't want to say take everything off the table.
No, just
you're
nuclear.
a bad negotiator if you do that.
Just nuclear.
Look, nuclear should be off the table. But would there be a time when it could be used? Possibly.
Okay, the trouble is when you said that, the whole world heard. David Cameron in Britain heard it. The Japanese, where we bombed them in 45, heard it. They're hearing a guy running for president of the United States talking of maybe using nuclear weapons. Nobody wants to hear that about an American president.
Why are we making them? Why do we make them? We have
because of the old mutual assured destruction which Reagan hated
just
and tried to get rid of.
I was against Iraq. I'd be the last one to use the nuclear weapons.
So can you take it off the table
now? That's sort of like the end of the ballgame.
Can you tell the Middle East we're not using the nuclear weapon on anybody?
I would never say that. I would never take any of my cards off the table.
How about Europe? We won't use it in Europe.
I'm not going to take it off the table.
You might use it in Europe?
No, I don't think so. But I'm not
just say it. I would never use a nuclear weapon in Europe.
I am not taking cards off the table. I'm not going to use nukes, but I'm not taking any cards off the table.
The trouble is that the sane people hear you, and the insane people are not affected by your threats. That's the trouble. The real fanatics say, good, keep it up.
I think they're more affected than you might think.
The three Republican candidates each spent an hour last night taking questions from Anderson Cooper on CNN. Some of Donald Trump's positions are new to American politics and, frankly, could alter the security of everyone on this planet. Let's bring in Rebecca Berg. She's the national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Rebecca, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Chef.
For decades, one of the bedrocks of American foreign policy has been stopping nuclear proliferation, and specifically providing security to some of our allies in exchange for, at least in part, that they not seek nuclear weapons. That's been true under all administrations, Republican and Democrat. Donald Trump is promoting a new policy. Listen.
So you have no problem with Japan, South Korea having nuclear weapons?
At some point, we have to say, you know what? We're better off if Japan protects itself against this maniac in North Korea. We're better off, frankly, if South Korea is going to start to protect itself.
Saudi Arabia, nuclear weapons?
Saudi Arabia, absolutely.
You would be fine with them having nuclear weapons?
No, not nuclear weapons, but they have to protect themselves.
But if you say to Japan, yes, it's fine, you get nuclear weapons, South Korea, you as well, and Saudi Arabia says we want them too.
Can I be honest with you? It's going to happen anyway. It's going to happen anyway. It's only a question of time.
It's going to happen anyway. Has there been reaction to this?
I mean, it's a completely perplexing statement, given what you said, the context of this being that U.S. policy has been for many, many years to try to limit nuclear proliferation. The fact that Donald Trump would say, well, it's going to happen anyway, so what does it matter, it really flies in the face of what United States policy has been on this for many, many years. Now, just because it has been the policy doesn't mean it's right. But if you look at what Donald Trump is saying by suggesting that countries who are under threat of attack by other countries, so South Korea, Japan, under threat of potential attack by North Korea, saying that those countries should have nuclear weapons is kind of akin to the argument of saying a good guy with a gun could stop a bad guy with a gun, except we're talking about nuclear weapons here, Chef, and I think many of our U.S. allies would be very startled to hear this sort of language.
And the Pentagon, from all that I know of everybody there and the reporting of Jennifer Griffin, the Pentagon would not be in favor of this proposal.
No, not at all. And Donald Trump has said that if he is president, he would listen to his generals. I think many of his generals, if he is president, would be suggesting that this is probably an ill-advised policy to be pushing for. But Donald Trump was waffling a little bit in his answer with Anderson Cooper. He clearly left a little bit of space there, saying that, well, it's going to happen anyway, so what does it matter? Maybe leaving some space to walk this back a little bit later on, but we'll have to see.
I suppose there's space.
General Hayden, Harold Ford, very quickly. Who amongst your peers that you respect greatly, whether they think like you or not think like you, did you know that's advising Mr. Trump?
No one.
Several months ago, a foreign policy expert on the international level went to advise Donald Trump, and 3 times he asked about the use of nuclear weapons. 3 times he asked, at one point, if we have them, why can't we use them? That's one of the reasons why he just doesn't have foreign policy experts around.
Trump asked 3 times.
3 times in an hour briefing, why can't we use nuclear weapons? The steps, Donald Trump decides to use a nuclear weapon. What is the time frame between his decision and when the nuclear weapons are launched?
Joe, it's scenario dependent, but the system is designed for speed and decisiveness. It's not designed to debate the decision.
I don't know what to say to you. So let's just talk to each other. Give me a call. Respond to this astonishing, even by the standards of the madness that we've visited upon ourselves on both sides of the Atlantic in the last couple of years. This is utterly unbelievable. Donald Trump has tweeted childlike gibberish, which seems to suggest military engagement with Russia, the 2 most powerful countries on the planet. Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming, nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. A few of you picked up on, I didn't know you could hear it because I thought I was being silent, but a few of you clearly picked up on a gulping sound or some sort of sound that I must have made as my last guest, Brian Klaas, fellow in global politics at the LSE, described the checks and balances in place that would effectively prevent Donald Trump from acting unilaterally on not just this issue, but also on the launching of a nuclear attack. And the reason I gulped is because there doesn't appear to be any checks and balances. And he writes about gas-killing animals. He uses the word smart. He's put it in quotes and given it an exclamation mark. I guess for all the time we've spent, or all the time I've spent telling you, some of you didn't believe me, I presume everybody does now, just how dangerous this man could be. This is the point at which even I have to admit I didn't think it would actually ever really come. They're just words. You know, I've read a lot of history books. I can tell you categorically that people following this path towards authoritarianism will at some point have to launch a military engagement in order to keep the population cowed. And then you can quote Goebbels explaining how it works. You can look at the paths towards fascism that always involve war, because it's the only way that you can keep a conned population quiet. Putin knows this better than anybody does. That's why he annexes places like Crimea, to keep the population quiet. He will love, I imagine, the fact that Donald Trump is now reduced to being just as atavistic and just as bovine as well, actually, Putin isn't bovine. Putin is clever. Putin is a diabolical genius. Donald Trump is a self-confessed sex offender with multiple bankruptcies and only yesterday a multi-million-dollar compensation payout to people he defrauded by pretending he was running a proper university. And here we are. So I hope this isn't unprofessional, but I'd like you to give me a call and tell me why we shouldn't be absolutely terrified of what the President of America has just tweeted. 03456060973 is the number that you need. And I'll take anything you've got. The tone of this tweet is frankly unbelievable. This is a precursor potentially to, you have to call it war, don't you? Between Russia and America. Someone mentioned the Bay of Pigs yesterday, which was when Khrushchev and Kennedy effectively reached the absolute brink of Armageddon over the deployment of nuclear missiles in Cuba or near Cuba within the proximity that they could reach America. And it came close. And I didn't laugh, but I did sort of dismiss it. And here we are today. I'll read it to you again because I'm hoping that every time I read it out, there's a little bit of me that's hoping the words might have changed when I turn back to it. Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. It was the ambassador to Libya who said that. I don't think this has come out of the Kremlin, unless that's happened while I've been on air. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming. This is the line that terrifies me. This line here, nice and new and smart, because that means, I mean, that is there with 5 words, 1 exclamation mark and 2 sets of quotations. That is the ultimate evidence that the man is an imbecile. Nice and new and smart. Who in the history of humanity would contemplate describing military ordnance on the world stage as nice and new and smart? Exclamation mark. You shouldn't be partners with a gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. I've run out of descriptions, I've run out of nouns, I've run out of adjectives. You call him a man-child, you call him an imbecile, you call him utterly amoral, you call him corrupt. I don't have the words to describe what this tweet suggests. 27 minutes after 12. Neither do I think you want me to just sit here spluttering until 1 o'clock. So feel free to call me. I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry, but I am absolutely bloody terrified by this tweet. Tell me why I shouldn't be. Daniel's in Radlett. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I mean, it's interesting what you just said, which is that it was the ambassador to Libya that actually said.
I think it was. Don't quote me on that. It was a Russian ambassador to somewhere who originally said we'll shoot the missiles out of the sky. But it might not have been Libya.
Okay, presuming the messaging is coming out of the Kremlin.
Presuming, yes.
Presuming. I think it's obviously a very dangerous starting point from them. I think they're used to Trump's rhetoric, and on Twitter certainly is a platform where he opens himself up to sounding stupid but saying very dangerous things. I think the question is, what should the response be to something like that?
Yeah.
Trump is always going to speak in Trumpisms. There's no way of stopping that.
Yeah,
and
true.
I'm as worried as you are, because obviously whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and all these words around it. We live in a world now where you can socialise a message like that is incredibly worrying, and Trump has the floor. What can we do?
You're not being very reassuring, Daniel. I appreciate it was a slightly vain hope. I shall read out some utterly terrifying and imbecilic warmongering from the leader of the free world, and then I'll open up my switchboard and get callers to tell me why I shouldn't be too worried about it. It's not got award-winning written all over it, this exercise, has it, mate?
Possibly not. But it is happening, and I think, unfortunately, as usual, it's out of our control. We're going to have to see how it plays out. Yes, Trump is very, very scary and dangerous, but so is Russia.
Well, yes, and it's probably a little bit early to start sticking it to people who have been operating in denial or expressing admiration of either Putin or Trump, or in the case, presumably, of some absolute idiots, they've expressed admiration of both. But to me, as this settles, this news settles, it assumes an aura of inevitability. I mean, of course, it had to end like this, or it had to lead to this.
This could be the start of World War III.
I am still not getting on that. I'm not getting on that bus yet. 12:30 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need to contribute to this conversation. I'm not criticising Daniel's conclusion there. I'm just not yet prepared to share it, and I'm conscious of, the role of journalism at a time like this is presumably to avoid the most sweeping and terrifying of conclusions. But that's when I think back to the book, It Couldn't Happen Here. At what point do you say, oh my God, it is happening? And what should Theresa May do now? There you go, stick that on your list as well. You won't be surprised to learn that this issue will be the focus of our attention between now and Sheila Fogarty's arrival at 1 o'clock. And you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The one thing I would say is that it was not hard at 10 o'clock this morning to conceive fairly compelling arguments for why the West should intervene in Syria. It wasn't a position I endorsed, but some of my callers did, and the explanation very simply would be that the international law has been breached. Russia has scuppered any attempt at proper investigation, presumably for very self-interested reasons. Therefore, even if we feel that it would, in a sense, be the wrong people doing it, it would still be the right thing to punish Assad for gassing civilians. But when you see that possibility framed in the language that the President of America has chosen to employ on Twitter in the last half an hour, it doesn't feel that somehow it being the right thing mitigates the fact that it would be the wrong person. It feels chilling. Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming. Nice and new and smart. Sorry to repeat myself, that's the line that I find most disturbing, because it speaks of his personal pathologies, nice and new and smart. Also, you know, very, very rich people always make a lot of money out of military engagement. Simon Marks is LBC's Washington correspondent and is hopefully here to tell us that it's all a terrible dream.
I keep pinching myself, James. I just got back to Washington last night from Istanbul, and I can tell you that certainly the Turkish government is one of those governments out there that firmly believes that something military must be done against the Syrian regime. So I think you've set this up exactly correctly. I mean, on the one hand, foreign policy idealists will say, well, isn't it wonderful that you've got a president in the White House who is actually willing to go to the mat and is willing to punish Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and, if necessary, the Russians for what President Trump has described as an atrocity. In other words, a president of the United States who is willing to enforce the red line that Barack Obama drew and then previously failed to enforce when the Syrians used chemical weapons against their own people. But the other side of the coin is an extremely large side of the coin, and you can't separate any of this from the political crises that are engulfing President Trump at the White House. This raid on his lawyer's office by the FBI earlier in the week was a seismic development in the investigation into Donald Trump, ties between the Trump campaign and the Russians during the 2016 election campaign, and also now questions about possibly illegal payments that were made to that porn star Stormy Daniels in a bid to keep her quiet as we headed towards Election Day in 2016. So you can't separate a president from the United States who now apparently no longer believes that you shouldn't talk publicly about the things militarily that you're planning to do in Syria. Now he's made it absolutely apparent there will be American airstrikes on Syria, something that he hadn't publicly announced until this somewhat ill-tempered tweet was published just within the last half an hour or so. You cannot separate that from a president of the United States who is in absolutely desperate political straits over the widening circle that is occupied by the Robert Mueller investigation.
It just postpones the judgment for him, though. If we can, I mean, the closest thing you can get to a comforting analysis of this is that he's doing the right thing for all the wrong reasons. But even if there is an escalation, the probe, the investigations don't go away. And I know you're aware of this, but for listeners who aren't, the decision to raid Michael Cohen's office that was in the building occupied by a law firm called Squire Patton Boggs in D.C. was approved by several Republican officers, wasn't it? I mean, several legal and political operators who are members of the Republican Party. So for him to sort of claim that it's a witch hunt or it's been undertaken, but I mean, Mueller himself is a Republican, and everybody involved in that decision-making process, a lot of them would have been Donald Trump appointees. So he can only postpone the problems that might be massing outside his door, Simon.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. But the calculus that he will make, and he said this before, I mean, he has claimed within the last few days that he has been tougher on Russia than any other president in American history. I'm not sure how that claim stacks up against, I don't know, John F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis or Ronald Reagan telling Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the Berlin Wall. But nonetheless, Donald Trump maintains he's been tougher on Russia than anybody. And this will allow him to say, look, I was even willing to risk the possibility of war with Russia. It is, though, astonishing when you sort of take yourself out of this and say, well, hang on a second, this is a Russian government statement threatening to shoot down American missiles.
Is it a government statement? So forgive me, because I know it was an envoy to Beirut.
Foreign ministry statement.
But, it's come out of the foreign ministry.
You're right. I believe it was an ambassador, but presumably speaking with the clearance of the Russian foreign ministry in
one would imagine
in Moscow. I mean, clearly a Russian official, presumably empowered to do so, saying we will shoot down any American missiles that rain down on Syria. And then an American president taking to Twitter and saying to the Russians, a country with whom he has previously said he wants to get along and with whose leader he's planning to have some kind of summit at the White House in the course of the next few weeks, following that extemporized offer when he congratulated Vladimir Putin on his election win, even though his national security staff warned him explicitly not to offer American congratulations, given the nature of the Russian election campaign. You've got this American president taking to Twitter and essentially saying to the Russians, bring it on. I mean, I think that takes all of us to the brink of a completely different situation in terms of the dialogue between Moscow and Washington, D.C., and it is a dangerous situation, which is why so many people, and you heard Brian Klaas earlier in the hour, say you should not be engaging in diplomacy, if you can even call it diplomacy, because it doesn't seem very diplomatic, in this fashion on Twitter. This is not the way things work, and they take everybody to the brink of a very dangerous, imminent period in global affairs.
How will this be, or how has it already been greeted in the Beltway, in the kind of political establishment of Washington? Before you answer that, I'll just read you something from the 5th of September 2013, because there's always a tweet. This is Donald Trump in September 2013. Again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen, and from that fight, the US gets nothing.
Exactly. Well, that was Trump, of course, warning Obama not to cross the red line that President Trump now insists Barack Obama should have enforced. There is always a tweet. There is never any solidity to the foreign policy narrative that emanates from the Trump presidency. Look, I mean, I think the other thing to bear in mind, James, is that over the last few weeks, the restraining influences, such as there were any inside the White House, have largely fled the coop, whether it was his Director of Communications, Hope Hicks, who has been with him from day one, from before day one, because she was his PR guy at the Trump Organization, or the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, or a whole series of other officials, even though I think he didn't have very much influence, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Yes. You know, the restraining figures in this administration have gone. And so it's not immediately clear, other than the increasingly discredited White House Chief of Staff General John Kelly, who sits down with President Trump this morning here and says, look, honestly, you actually were right. Your instinct was right the first time round. You shouldn't be telegraphing on Twitter what you're planning to do militarily. Why have you suddenly abandoned that overnight? Why are you goading the Russians and daring them now to shoot down your missiles, running the risk of sparking a wider confrontation between Washington, D.C. and Moscow? You know, the Republican centrists, people like John McCain and Senator Lindsey Graham, I think are very unlikely to provide Donald Trump with very much political cover here. But, you know, he can rely on the young sort of upstart Republicans who have solidly supported him through thick and through thin on issues both domestic and international over the last 12-plus months. Yes. And they are very unlikely to stand up to him in the face of this kind of rhetoric.
I have another tweet, actually, just dropped in the last 4 minutes. Our relationship with Russia, and in many ways it seems a little bit more emollient. Our relationship with Russia is worse now than it has ever been, and that includes the Cold War. A week ago, he was admiring him. Anyway, there is no reason for this. Russia needs us to help with their economy, something that would be very easy to do, and we need all nations to work together. Stop the arms race? Question mark. Is he just falling apart now?
I mean, that's the head-snapping aspect to all of this, isn't it? And even if you are the biggest Donald Trump fan, and I know we have many listeners who are big Donald Trump fans, there's just no consistency to any of this. So at this point, it's hard to know what you're even a fan of. Are you a fan of improved relationships between the United States and Russia, or are you a fan of the possibility of the United States and Russia going to war over Syria? Which Donald Trump is it that you actually back? Because on this issue and a whole raft of others, as we see again and again and again, he contradicts himself relentlessly. And again, you can't separate any of this from the Mueller investigation, which is now, for the first time, I think it's fair to say, directly touching Donald Trump, because it has expanded to look at the nature of the payments that were made to that adult film actress just before the 2016 election. As that happened, suddenly he cancels his trip to Latin America. He was supposed to be off at the Summit of the Americas in Lima, advancing American interests in that particular region. He he bins that, tells Mike Pence to go in his place, and he stays here ostensibly to oversee the military campaign against Syria. But again, this is a man who was perfectly happy to launch missiles against Syria, if you recall, over that beautiful piece of chocolate cake down in Mar-a-Lago when he was entertaining Xi Jinping of China just a few months ago. He clearly came to the conclusion that he needed to be in Washington for some reason. And I would suggest to you the reason is because, in fact, a bigger deal for him is organising the response to Robert Mueller rather than the response to the use of chemical weapons in Syria.
And the preceding tweets to this, to the Russian ones, do rather speak to that analysis. Simon Marks, interesting image, you say, that the Mueller investigation finally touching Donald Trump. I wonder how long it will be before the Mueller investigation grabs him by the proverbials. It's 12:46. Continuing to react to this astonishing, even by his own dismal standards, this latest intervention by Donald Trump on social media, essentially announcing the imminent launching of missiles at Syrian government positions, something that the Russian, I think, envoy to Beirut, but as Simon Marks said, there's no way he'd be speaking without sanction from the Kremlin in such important terms, will respond to by shooting at the missiles and at the platforms from which the missiles were launched. That will be the ships in the Gulf. And, you know, sense of that we've had on this programme a little bit in recent years, recent months, of being the boy at the back of the crowd going, no, look, seriously, the emperor is naked. There's rarely been better evidence of just how mad and bad this man is. And to learn, as we've done in the last hour, that the checks and balances in place on preventing military action being undertaken on the whim of one leader have in many ways been diluted in the aftermath of the September the 11th terror attacks, leave Donald Trump essentially able to even employ nuclear weapons without much objection or obstacle. And now the comforting thought is that he's not really serious about war. He's just trying to draw attention away from the escalating investigation into everything from his alleged collusion with Russia right through to his lawyer allegedly paying off a woman that he'd had sex with a few weeks after his wife gave birth. Do you know what? As you list that litany, for the first time, I actually do begin to wonder whether he was wrong about that Fifth Avenue thing we've quoted so many times. You know, when he said I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and these people would still support me. I know Simon Marks said there'll be a kind of hawkish element of the younger Republican movement who will continue to applaud and cheer him whatever it is that he does, but I guess I've just got too much faith in human nature. Surely now people will go, God, no, he shouldn't be president. But remember, Hillary Clinton used an email server that she shouldn't have done. Hugo's in Manchester. Hugo, what would you like to say?
I'm chilled to the bone.
Go on.
Utterly. This morning, I've listened to you all the way up on the M6 today, and I was almost persuaded that to do something to uphold international law, even with the wrong people, was potentially the right side of the argument to fall down on. That was how I came off that section of your program, and now having heard that tweet, the rising of the rhetoric, the ratcheting up, it's absolutely terrifying. I was in the Navy, so I don't think I'm a snowflake. I don't think I'm a frail constitution. But I had this vision of ships sinking in the Gulf and the inevitable sequence of events that will flow from that potentiality is...
do you think the second tweet, because I suspect you might have been on the line before I read out the second tweet, does that look a little bit like damage control? I know it sounds like I'm clutching at straws, but frankly, if you've got any straws right now, I want them.
I think I missed the second tweet.
Oh, well, let me remind you of it. I'm not going to be able to find it in time now. Our relationship with Russia is worse now than it has ever been, and that includes the Cold War. So, I mean, look, in the great scheme of things, being utterly ignorant of modern political history is no longer a big issue for me, so we'll let that pass. There is no reason for this. Russia needs us to help with their economy, something that would be very easy to do, and we need all nations to work together, full stop, stop the arms race, question mark.
That was him, was that? That was
Well, he's still talking about missiles winging their way to Syria imminently, nice and new and shiny, whatever they. And nothing much has ever been achieved with airstrikes, as I recall. So, he's still got to put feet on the ground if you were to do anything substantial.
To follow through, and then you have the envoy distinctly stating that they'd go after the platforms from which the missiles had been launched. Hugo, we'll talk again. I already missed the days when if someone rang in and told me they were chilled to the bone, I'd think they were kind of referring to how relaxed they were. Jason McHugh is the London-based law firm McHugh and Partners, and he's also co-lead counsel on a lawsuit in the USA, which, under American description, it's a class action against Facebook, a joint class action for allegedly misusing the personal data of more than 71 million people. And he joins me on the line now. Two things, Jason, if I may. The first is, what would success look like in this context? Presumably it's some sort of payout for everybody who's had their information accessed. And the second question is, what is the alleged misuse? Is simply accessing it a misuse in and of itself?
Yeah, I mean, following on from your last piece, which I was just listening to there, this is about the small guy, the users, ordinary people, actually dealing with big business. This isn't leaving it the question to the authorities and Trump or May. This is about the small guy bringing an action for compensation, and we're bringing it under an American piece of legislation called the Stored Communications Act, which puts a minimum penalty of $1,000 for each misuse. So you can do the math with 70 million people, 1 million in the UK. It's a very large class action.
And the misuse is what has already been reported. The idea that they were obtaining private information, that would be misuse under your suit in and of itself.
Yes. I mean, the facts that are alleged are that Facebook allowed Cambridge Analytica in to use data of 240,000 people in around 2014 from memory, and that was apparently for academic purposes.
Yes.
But by 2015, we alleged that Facebook knew it was being used incorrectly and didn't actually do what they promised to the Federal Trade Commission in 2001 and would never happen, which was allow then the information to be carried on to be used and misused of their users.
So
and that's the heart of the suit.
And absolutely, and I've got a horrible feeling either the line is going to collapse or you, quite rightly, as a very good lawyer, will decline to answer this question. But I think, as you heard the piece we were doing before, Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer who got raided, had an office in a building that belonged to Squire, Patton and Boggs, a prominent DC law firm. It used to be called Patton Boggs. I don't know when the Squire joined. So Michael Cohen's office was there. I believe they're also the lawyers for Cambridge Analytica.
Shocker. And you'll also find Cambridge Analytica linked to the Mercier family, who were one of Trump's biggest backers.
And Steve Bannon, of course, has links to both Cambridge Analytica and Donald Trump and Breitbart News, the propaganda wing of the Trump movement.
Exactly.
And there goes
exactly. And that is why, following on from your previous piece, that some people have to make a stand. And I think Facebook users are the right people to do it.
Jason McHugh, we'll talk again. And you're right. It's such unprecedented territory. It's hard to know to whom will fall the responsibility of doing the right thing. But that's true, then. You've got it there. That one building in Washington, D.C., which, oddly enough, I've been in. I've been in the library when it was called Patton Boggs, for reasons that I don't have time to share with you at the moment. But you just riddle me that, OK? Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, has an office in the building that is Squire, Patton and Boggs's. Squire, Patton, Boggs are the lawyers for Cambridge Analytica. Also, I think, for Gazprom, a prominent Russian company, and Robert Mercer and his family, who bankrolled everything from Cambridge Analytica right through to the Breitbart News, are in the frame as well.
But I'm good at war. I've had a lot of wars of my own. I'm really good at war. I love war. I would bomb the shit out of them.
more militaristic than anybody in this room. I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me.
When Donald Trump speaks about foreign policy, it scares the hell out of me.
We're about to turn over the nuclear codes of the United States to an erratic individual.
And you can tell them to go themselves.
Harry Truman, with what he did, having the guts to drop the bomb. And here's a man who would do the same thing.
I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left. 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 There would be nothing left.